The day they told her to make the coffee. The Mojave wind was already howling like something feral outside the canvas walls. Radios crackled, screens glowed, and grown men who'd been to Afghanistan and back were reduced to bickering over why the drone feed kept stuttering. She listened, took the empty steel carafe and walked, quiet as a rumor, through the joint operations tent. Past a tangle of fiber lines and a map already out of date. By sunset, a helicopter would disappear over the range. By midnight, a 4-star would step into that tent, see the woman rinsing a dented percolator, and forget how to breathe. And by dawn, the soldiers who joked about the coffee girl would line up, dusty and wordless, to salute the ghost they'd almost buried. If stories of hidden legends and razor-quiet courage hit you right in the chest, stick around. When you're done, tap subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded. Respect is earned in the dark, not handed out under the lights. The forward camp they'd thrown up on the western flats of the National Training Center looked like a pop-up city that had decided at the last second to hate itself. Beige tents buckled in the wind. Antennas wagged. The desert heat baked metal into a smell you could taste. They called it Range Echo, a temporary command note ahead of a week of joint exercises. Army, Air Guard, a couple of Marines who swore they were just here to watch the Army try logistics, plus a contractor or two everyone pretended not to see. Specialist Anna Varen stepped off the back of a dusty LMTV with a duffel over one shoulder and a government-issue travel mug in the other. She felt the wind shove grit into her teeth and did what she always did when a new place tried to introduce itself too loudly. She let the noise slide past and looked for the details that mattered. She saw the details at a glance, because that was her curse and her grace. The satellite dish was misleveled by a thumb's width on the north leg. The generator pair was running in load share, but the left alternator had a note of metal, too sharp on the high end. The Coax bundle entering the JTOC had a stress kink where someone had laid a Pelican case on it and forgotten to move the case. Little things. Harmless things. Until the one time they weren't. Specialist Varen? A sergeant with namestrip Galson and a sunburn that would blister by morning skimmed a clipboard, found a line and scratched through it. Barracks is Tent 12B, Cot 3. T-shirts Tuesdays and Thursdays. Your admin support to Colonel Madison in the JTOC. He jerked his head at the biggest tent, the one bristling with whip antennas. You know your way around a printer? Yes, Sergeant. The answer was true in the same unhelpful way that calling the Pacific Ocean some water was true. Inside 12B, the cots were arranged in two facing rows like a school bus had tried to become a dorm. Someone had strung a line of little American flags over a footlocker. Someone else had taped up an LSU pennant. The air smelled like CLP, cotton, and heat. She slid her duffel under the cot, smoothed the army green blanket into hospital corners so sharp they looked spiteful, and sipped from the mug. A private 2 cots down, the kind who made friends before he made his bed, looked up, hopeful. Hey, you new? Where you from? Out of 7th Sustainment, she said, because that was what her file said now. Because a stack of signatures and a ceremony with no cameras had made it true in the way truth works for people who live between lines. Name's Diaz, he said, sticking out a hand and then remembering they were both indoors. If you need anything like, I dunno, the good toothpaste, holler. Appreciate it, she said. When he glanced at the duffel and wondered about the weight, she let the moment pass without offering him any story to chew. At 0755, she stood at parade rest in the JTOC the way the manuals taught. People moved like beads on different wires. Air Guard captain with a headset half on. Marine major who didn't know where to put his hands without a rifle in them. Civilian contractor with a barcode tattoo and a polo that said Parallax Systems over the heart. Screens hummed. A map board breathed under the weight of magnets. The radios were doing that thing where they're loud but not useful. Colonel Thomas Madison, 50s, squared off by regulation and the gym, the kind of man who looked credible behind any table, didn't look up when she reported. He had the mapboard face on, eyes locked on a grid square like if he stared long enough the radios would stop lying. Specialist, he said eventually, voice like dry ice. Your file says admin. We've got 3 comms techs, 2 intel weenies, and a company clerk who knows the difference between a manifest and a grocery list. We do not have a hole that looks like you. Yes, sir. He flicked the file open, its redactions neat in their way. Every black bar is a decision that someone once swore was brave and right. He tapped at nothing on the page and then, without looking up, cut his eyes to the corner where a battered percolator sat next to a crate of MRE crackers. Coffee's empty, he said. Let's start there. He didn't say it mean. He didn't have to. The room absorbed it and metabolized it into the little chuckles soldiers allow themselves when something lands exactly where they expect. The new specialist, the admin, the woman, getting handed a carafe. Anna nodded once. She lifted the steel pot, felt the looseness of the handle where the rivet was about to go, and carried it to the water buffalo. Someone made the kind of joke you tell in mixed company when you want to pretend it isn't about gender. Someone else's grin died when she didn't react. She measured grounds without thinking about it. Thought about other measurements instead. The route from the JTOC door to the generator shack. 68 steps if you walked it straight and didn't apologize for your elbows. The spacing of the antenna farm, which was wrong. Too tightly clustered on the desert side, leaving mutual interference in a band they would need if the primary went foul. The routing on the inside of the tent, cables on the floor where boots would tread because they didn't have enough hangers. She cataloged voices the way other people cataloged faces. Who breathed into their mic, who clipped words, who didn't talk unless you called on them twice. She brewed, poured, wiped the ring off Madison's map table with the corner of her sleeve because she cared about maps being honest. And she listened. You can hear a plan even when people aren't saying it out loud. By afternoon, the wind felt like it could pick up a Humvee by the mirrors and laugh while it set it down somewhere inconvenient. A guard drone flying the western corridor had gone jittery. The operator, 23, eyes too caffeinated even at noon, swore it was just the heat shimmer. The parallax contractor said their firmware didn't trend to failure. Someone at the far radio started thumping the casing to make it work, which is a thing people have done to machines since machines were invented, and sometimes it works. Anna walked the coffee around and spoke exactly twice. Loose rivet, she told the generator corporal, because she could hear it now from across the way. I'll have maintenance, he started. It'll walk itself out under load, she said. Trade me a wrench. He handed her a stubby box end because his hands were full with everything else and because sometimes the quickest way to keep your pride is to let someone save you 5 minutes. She snugged the rivet, handed back the wrench, and moved on before he could thank her enough to make it weird. Later, she paused at the cable kink where the Pelican case sagged on the bundle like a lazy cat on a shelf. She slid the case off with the same careful pressure she'd used to take a weapon off a sleeping man and nudged the cable straight with the toe of her boot. Nobody noticed, which meant it would work. Evening brought barbecue smoke from the mobile chow team and a row of folding tables that looked like a church social had lost its hymnals and found a pallet of wet wipes. A chaplain in desert camo blessed the food. A Marine complained with real detail about Army hot sauce. Diaz found her on the edge of the tables and offered a paper plate piled too high. You always this quiet? He asked. Just listening, she said. To what? He tilted his head, genuinely curious. Everything, she said, and then spared him the part where listening is what saved you, more often than shouting did. Lights out at range echo was a suggestion. The desert doesn't care about your plan. But the generators dimmed a notch and the radios stopped pretending all answers would arrive by dinner. Anna lay on her cot with her boots in the corner where she could reach them in the dark. She replayed the day not to enjoy it, she didn't, but to catalog it. The dish angle, the rivet, the kink, the way the Air Guard captain's left hand trembled when he talked about losing the Western Corridor, which meant he was already 2 steps ahead to a scenario no one wanted to say out loud. The way Colonel Madison's voice thinned when the drone feed hiccuped, the way he needed the map to stop lying to him and it wouldn't. At 23:30, someone laughed too hard at a joke by the fire barrel, which is usually how you know fear is starting to do push-ups in the back of the room. At 0037, a radio burped static like a man swallowing a confession. At 0145, a Chinook blew heat across the tent, big and blunt and comforting as a bear. At 0218, the Black Hawk went missing. It slipped off the net like a coin sliding off a bar. Nothing dramatic, just gone. The pilot's last words were routine and boring, which is how pilots like them. The radar handoff on the western side of the range didn't show it. The drone feed that should have watched that corridor was having an evening, which is what the parallax rep said when the colonel asked for an answer and none of his screens would cooperate. The JTOC was suddenly a room where no one's shoes fit. Madison asked questions with knives in them. The Air Guard captain answered because that's what you do even when the answer hurts. The Marine who didn't know where to put his hands found a pen and pretended it mattered. The contractor tried to shape the word anomaly into a shield big enough to hide behind. Anna set the empty carafe on the warmer and stepped one pace left so the light from the old HF console struck her hands. The console wasn't a museum piece. It was just old enough to be judged by its color and the way it smelled when it warmed up. The last time anyone had used it, the dials had been set for a night broadcast to a logistics element outside Yuma. A strip of label maker tape said don't touch in block caps because nothing is more tempting than a switch you've been told isn't yours. She touched it anyway. Not like a thief, like a tech who had once built a life from knowing which things would forgive you if you approached them right. Madison saw her move and something in him snapped back to the simpler cruelty of the morning. Specialist, he said, the word clipped. If I wanted coffee, I'd say it slow. Step away from my radios. She didn't. Her hands were on the power knobs now, not rushing. She let the tubes warm. The console exhaled that sweet, dusty breath that old electronics keep like a secret. You do not touch my... Madison began, and then the HF woke with a long, low, living hum that cut under the tense noise like a bass line under a pop song. Heads turned because the sound was unfamiliar to these men who'd learned on digital things, on smooth interfaces that thought for you. Anna leaned in, listening for the slop in the band. She found it by feel as much as sound. You can teach a person how to hear in school, but the desert teaches you with dry hands and consequence. She tuned down and then up again, slow enough to find where the night had set its teeth. She keyed a call to the range control repeater and bounced it off a ridgeline the tablets didn't have the math for because the ridge wasn't supposed to be like that. Except it was, because rocks don't read manuals. Range echo, this is JTOC, she said, voice level and plain. Advise if you have traffic from Ghost Hawk 23 last 10 mics. The air answered with a hiss and then a few seconds of nothing the size of a church. Negative JTOC, last packet T-13 mics. We're showing. The voice fuzzed. The night took a little bite. Degraded signals in Sector Whiskey 7. Madison planted both palms on the map table and didn't shout, which told Anna he might, maybe, be worth saving. He looked at her like she'd broken into his house and found his grandfather's radio under a bed. What did you just turn on? The thing that still works, she said. Someone laughed. Too high. Someone else whispered, old school. Like it was a curse or a prayer. The parallax rep found his phone and stared at it, which is what people do when the only God they trust won't answer. Can you pull voice? The guard captain asked. Because the questions that matter are always short. If there's voice to pull, Anna said, hands steady on the dials. And if they're still talking. She listened for the shape of a helicopter rotor inside the noise. There's a way the desert throws sound back at you. 1 second late, a little thinner, as if to ask if you meant it. You learn that shape if you're out in it long enough. She heard nothing and didn't tell the room because hope is a tool and you don't break tools in the field. The colonel took one step closer, not enough to crowd, just enough to admit facts. The consoles he trusted were lying. The one he'd ignored was telling the truth. The person he'd assigned to coffee was the only one in the tent whose hands weren't fidgeting. Specialist Herein, he said, trying her name the way you try a rope before you lean on it. What can you get me? Give me 10 minutes, she said. And then, because she is merciful, she added, Sir. She rode the dial and the night and the shape of the range, built a hop pattern the manuals wouldn't approve and the physics would, and found a pocket where the static wasn't king. The HF coughed, then cleared its throat, then offered up a threadbare voice that could have been a prayer or a machine or both. Mayday, mayday. 2-3. Fuel good. Visibility low. Terrain. The rest fell through the floor. The room went colder, though the heaters kept doing their cheerful lies. Madison looked around for confirmation and found only eyes. He turned back to Anna like a man ready to sell a small part of his pride if the price included position and time. "Lock it," he said. She locked it. Outside, the wind barreled across the flats. Somewhere in the dark, a helicopter waited with the patience of a predator or a saint. Anna leaned into the hum, closed out the rest of the tent with a turn of her wrist, and made the night tell her what it knew. Morning at Range Echo arrived like a shrug. No sunrise worth writing home about, just the Mojave swapping one kind of brightness for another and daring you to pretend you liked it. The wind took a breather. The dust didn't. Generators droned in that oddly comforting way that says, "Keep moving, we're all pretending this is normal." Specialist Anna Varen poured the first pots before anyone asked. She moved the percolator off its hot spot 3 inches to the left so the element wouldn't blister the gasket again. She set out mugs, wiped the mapboard ring without touching a magnet, and made herself ordinary. Then she audited. Coffee duty meant access. People don't guard what they think is beneath them. She drifted through the JTOC like a minor function. Top-offs, wipe-downs, a quiet watch your boot on that Cokes, sir, and logged a steady stream of facts she would never say out loud. The Parallax Systems router wore a firmware tag 2 versions behind the last hardened build. Their rep insisted the new build had stability concerns, which usually means it fixed a bug someone else needs. The SATCOM dish still sat a thumb off level, making the tracking motor work harder than it should. The HF ground strap looked clean enough, but she could see the lightest corona of green where dust and time were making the copper consider a career change. Out on the flats, the antenna farm quivered, too close together on the southwest arc. If the primary went noisy, the alternates would couple and sing to each other in ways no manual would admit. She noted it the way you note a rattle in a door hinge when you're supposed to be admiring the paint. When Sergeant Galson ducked in with a clipboard and a sunburn the color of regret, she met him halfway with a thermos and, subtle as a suggestion, turned his shoulders so he didn't snag the HF Cokes with his radio belt. He never saw her do it. He never would. He would just arrive someplace safer than he might have and chalk it up to luck. "Varen," he said, scrawling a signature. "Colonel wants the SIPR terminal logged in and ready when he gets back from the range walk." Roger. She could log into anything with a keyboard and a conscience. Today, she used the card and token issued by a system that thought she was boring. She respected the system's optimism. Diaz popped in mid-morning, hair flattened by a Kevlar. He clearly hadn't unclipped in a hurry. "You hear they're pushing the joint air lane north?" Guard birds didn't like the thermal over the ridgeline. Hotter than a skillet out there. "Copy," she said, setting a mug in front of him before he asked. "Copy," he echoed, amused at her brevity. And then his face went serious the way young faces do when they remember they might be part of a real story. You hear anything last night?" "About the hawk." "Only what you heard," she said, which was technically honest. She had heard a mayday ground out in the noise like a prayer getting caught in a storm drain. She had found the pocket in the band no one else knew to look for. She had tuned in the night and asked it for the truth, and it had offered her a thread she could almost hold. None of that would help Diaz now. Hope is a tool. You hand it out carefully and you don't leave it in the rain. By noon, the JTOC had the nervous neatness of a room waiting for news. Colonel Madison worked the phones like a boxer working a speed bag. Fast, rhythmic, eyes elsewhere. The Parallax rep pitched non-attributable interference, with the posture of a man who had practiced saying nothing into something. The Air Guard captain redrew an air corridor with the flat edge of a ruler and a precision that suggested he'd been up since yesterday. Anna swept behind the racks and killed a cable kink with the toe of her boot. She cleaned a fan filter with a square of alcohol wipe because airflow is peace. She watched the heartbeat LEDs on the core switch tick-tick-tick like a hard promise. She tuned the HF carefully and didn't key. Not unless someone told her to. Not unless the night told her first. She audited people, too. You can learn more about a system by watching who flinches when what fails than you can from any manual. The Marine Major, all shoulders and restless hands, didn't like rooms with problems he couldn't solve by walking toward them. The guard captain hated guessing. He built little islands of certainty the way engineers build bridges, one sure thing to the next. Madison wanted the map to stop lying. He looked at it as if Will could mend terrain. The parallax man loved language that made responsibility mean adjacency. Diaz watched whoever was talking and whoever wasn't. Good instincts for a private. At 1300, range control lit up with a training burst. Simulated EW in Whiskey 7 from 1330 to 1500 for exercise realism. The message made a neat grim circle with what had happened last night, and no one wanted to trace the line with a finger. Madison signed the deconfliction like a man initialing a loan. "We need our lane hot," he told the guard captain. "We can't pause the exercise every time we get the shakes." "Copy," the captain said politely, which in officer means, "Sir, I hear you, and I think you just bought yourself a headache." Anna filed the time window. She measured the map with her eyes. She took the percolator off heat so it wouldn't scorch, even as the room prepared to. At 1335, the JTOC got loud without raising its voice. The digital nets didn't drop, they slurred. Latency went from annoying to insulting. Packets arrived with parts missing. The drone feed on the North Corridor took on the stuttering look of a film someone had scrubbed too many times. The parallax rep leaned over a tech's shoulder and began phrases with "actually." Madison stalked to the primary console. "Follow the playbook," he snapped. "Prioritize command and air. If we have to shed, we shed non-critical." "Sir, with respect," the guard captain said mildly. "Everything looks non-critical until it isn't." Anna stepped to the HF like a woman stepping to a sink. The old console warmed in a slow exhale that said, "You'll get what you get." She tuned down one band, up another, threw a low, polite hail to range control, and hooked a ridgeline that didn't know it was doing her a favor. Range came back. Not strong, but there. "Go ahead, JTOC. Confirm Whiskey 7 emissions active." She could feel Madison's eyes on the back of her neck. She gave him nothing but competence. Humiliation is loud. Performance whispers. "Affirmative," Range said. "A beat. We're seeing bleed into Sierra 4. Advise. Advise you throttle 10% for 60 seconds on my mark," she said automatically. "We'll use the valley pocket to clear a holdup on our side." Silence. She jumped chains and everyone in the room knew it. The parallax man's eyebrows climbed like he could catch a ride out of this conversation. Then Range came back, voice smiling despite itself. "Copy your mark." She gave it. The room didn't notice, not exactly. They noticed that the drone feed hiccuped less, that the air corridor call settled enough for the captain to draw his island to the next. They noticed they could breathe. They did not ask why. People don't interrogate miracles when they're still using them. Madison didn't thank her. He did something better. "Varen," he said, "not specialist, not coffee, just her name." "What else is weak?" She started simple. "Dish is misleveled. Tracking motor is compensating too much. Left generator will eat its own alternator if you let the rivet walk. Antenna farm's too tight on the desert side. If the primary gets chatty, the alternates will hold hands and sing. Parallax firmware is stale. The HF ground wants love." The Marine snorted. "She just called our entire backyard ugly." "I called it fixable," Anna said and moved. She took Diaz and a corporal with a toolbox and made little things right. She split the antenna cluster by 1.5 yards and watched the noise floor behave itself. She leveled the dish with the dead simple authority of a bubble-finding center. She walked the generator pair and had the corporal snug the rivet he would have sworn was fine until it wasn't. She brushed the ground strap bright so the HF would feel wanted. "Who the hell are you?" the corporal asked, half admiring, half afraid of an answer that would make him complicit. "Admin support," she said. Back in the JTOC, she slid the percolator back where it belonged, topped Madison's mug, and pretended not to see the way he moved his maps to give her room near the HF. That's what respect looks like first. An extra inch of table, a question asked a half-second sooner than you think to ask it. At 1530, the training EW ended and the digital nets went back to their cheerful lies. The parallax rep manufactured a postmortem in real time. The guard captain nodded through it and wrote his own in his head. The Marine major found something to carry somewhere else because his hands needed weight. Diaz handed Anna a power bar like it was a medal. You hear anything about Ghost Hawk 2-3? He tried again, soft. Not yet, she said. Not a lie. The night hadn't told her today's secrets yet. Twilight came on with that desert speed, nothing and then all of it. The sky turned the color of a bruise remembering its origin. The Chow team served something that wanted to be stew when it grew up. Someone's Bluetooth speaker muttered country music until a sergeant major glared it quiet. Anna stood a little downwind of the fire barrel and watched silhouettes move like cutouts against the light. Training chatter hummed. Rumor thrummed lower, like sub-bass. A pilot who knew the missing crew from a course 2 duty stations ago spoke quickly and then stopped. A medic rehearsed silently how to tell a joke if the story ended wrong. Diaz joined her without speaking and stood there exactly as long as a friend should. At 21:20, the HF called to her the way a road calls to a driver who's been home too long. She drifted back into the JTOC and checked the strap. Touched the dial with the same care you use to wake a child you love. Madison was at the far table, magnifying an area of the map where the land folded in on itself like old money. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. He had learned something about the shape of her in his tent. She tuned for the valley pocket, for the way night lays different over rock than over scrub. She threw a hail not to range but to the air itself, a scattershot of politeness across frequencies too old for comfort and too honest for politics. She waited. The old hum rose, patient as a hymn. 2-3, weak but steady. Came a voice that sounded like a man who had decided to ration his fear. Position unknown. Terrain masking. Fuel nominal, engine too hot. Advise. Anna didn't speak. Madison did because he was the commander and because leaders earn their voices back by using them when it counts. Ghost Hawk 2-3, this is range echo actual. Squawk any NAV you have. Can you transmit burst lat/long? Negative burst. Can ketone. Anna tapped a pencil once, twice. Calculating a hill shadow, a ridgeline bounce, the laziness of a thermal at night. Key on my mark, Madison said. Eyes on her. Waiting for a nod she gave a millimeter of. Mark. A tone came thin and reedy. The kind you lose if you breathe wrong. She coaxed it into the HF's ear, notching out the slop, catching the echo that meant rock to the east and a basin to the west. She looked at the map where Madison already waited with grease pencil poised. Here, she said, putting the pad of her finger on a nothing square the army had named years ago because armies like to name everything. Low saddle west of Ridge 214. Cold air pool. You'll have subsidence in the notch. Madison plodded, fast and steady. The guard captain bridged to air with a calm that would sell you religion. The Marine major smiled without meaning to. Diaz, somewhere in the doorway, held his breath like a kid waiting to hear if the magic trick worked. 2-3, advise you hold altitude, slide 10 degrees starboard. Ride the thermal off that saddle, Madison said, voice level. You've got a window 3 mics wide if you take it. A beat. 2. Copy, the pilot said softly, and you could hear the cockpit move in his voice. The tent breathed. Somewhere in the dark, a helicopter lifted its nose, found the seam between bad and worse, and threaded it. Madison exhaled. The guard captain's hand unclenched from his ruler. The parallax rep stared a hole in his own shoes. Anna set the pencil down like a surgeon handing back a scalpel. Specialist Herein, Madison said, the name coming out like a decision reaching its own conclusion. Stay on HF. We'll hold the digital. If they call back, it's yours. She nodded, stepped half an inch closer to the radio nobody had loved this morning, and waited for the night to answer again. Outside, the Mojave dragged its blanket of cold over the camp. Inside, the old console hummed like a secret that had decided to be kind. And the woman everyone mocked as the coffee girl listened, steady as a metronome, while a missing bird rode its way back toward men who wanted it home. The desert doesn't knock politely. It barges in with grit under your eyelids and static in your teeth. By dawn of the third day, range echo felt strung too tight, like an old guitar whose strings had been tuned one turn past sensible. Everyone could hear it even if they didn't admit it. Anna brewed the coffee anyway. That was the role. Silent, Steady, forgettable. She poured Colonel Madison his first mug before he asked, her hands neat as always. She didn't need to check the percolator twice. She needed to check the cables on the floor, the way the SATCOM dish leaned a whisper too far east, the slight tremor in the air guard captain's fingers as he logged the flight lane updates. She saw it all, but she said nothing. Not yet. At 0430, the radios began to die. It didn't happen dramatically. No explosion, no smoking equipment. Just one net after another falling quiet, like candles going out in a draft. Echo Patrol missed their check-in. Then Bravo. The drone feed blinked red and stayed there. Madison leaned over the console, jaw tight. "Cycle the system," he ordered. The tech's fingers flew, but the screen answered with frozen blue. A reboot bought nothing. "Atmospherics," one officer muttered. Another said, "Solar flare maybe." The parallax contractor, sweating through his polo, whispered jamming, but no one wanted to say it loud enough for the word to stick. Anna already knew. She had charted the dead zones during her first nights here, counted the static pulses at the coldest hours. This wasn't weather. This was orchestration. A net sliced apart with surgical patience. "Sir," Peters, the youngest comms tech, called. "We've lost contact across the northern corridor. That's 2 patrols unaccounted for." Madison barked for alternatives, but the digital suite was gone. Every screen a liar. The air thickened. Men shouting over each other. The Marine Major pacing like a caged animal. Fear always smells the same. Copper and sweat and the itch of things falling apart. Anna set the coffee pot down with a soft click. That tiny sound cut through the noise sharper than a shout. She stepped past the maps, past the officers, toward the corner no one cared about. The HF console, a relic with dust in its vents and a strip of tape that read "Do not touch." "Specialist," Madison snapped, voice edged with humiliation and command. "Step back." She didn't. Her fingers moved in a sequence too quick to be guessed at, flipping power toggles, letting the tubes warm. The hum rose low and alive. A green cursor blinked awake. Her hands on the keys were not clerk's hands. They were the hands of someone who had built and broken entire systems in shadows no one acknowledged. "What's she?" Lieutenant Kovic started, but Peters answered in a whisper. "Frequency hopping. Manual build." Sir, that's not in any manual." Anna didn't look at them. She tuned, nudging the signal like a mechanic listening to an engine knock. Static burst, then thinned. A faint voice bled through. "Echo 2. Under fire. Coordinates." The rest dissolved. Anna's eyes narrowed. Her fingers danced. She forced a burst mode through the uplink, filtered the noise, and coaxed the data string onto the screen. "Coordinates," she said evenly, tearing the scrap from the printer and sliding it across the map table. "Echo 2 pinned. Box Canyon. Sniper Overwatch." Her voice held no triumph, only fact. The tent went silent. Madison stared at the paper, then at her. He looked like a man who'd just seen the ground move under his boots. This wasn't coffee duty. This was command. And it was hers now, whether he liked it or not. For a long second, no one spoke. Then Peters, trembling, wide-eyed, whispered the word none of the younger soldiers were supposed to know. "Kestrel." The name landed like a thunderclap. Madison's jaw clenched. The parallax rep turned pale. And in the silence that followed, the coffee girl kept typing, calm and relentless, as if ghosts didn't need permission to haunt the living. The Blackhawks' coordinates were barely dry on the map when the thrum of rotor blades rolled across range echo. Not the high whine of a guard bird, not the lazy chop of a medevac. This was deeper, heavier, a sound that bent conversations mid-word. Dust churned against the tents as a UH-60 with fresh paint and a 4-star insignia on its fuselage came down like judgment. Colonel Madison straightened his uniform in the reflection of a dark screen that no longer worked. Men pulled themselves into parade-ready postures, shoulders stiff, eyes trying not to dart at the failing consoles. Anna stayed at the HF set, calm as a metronome, fingers adjusting the gain on a stubborn channel. She did not look toward the noise outside. General Marcus Thorne stepped into the JTOC a moment later, boots crisp on the plywood floor. Tall, broad, his face a map of years spent both at desks and in deserts. He carried command like a weather front. The aides trailed him, notepads out, pens already scribbling. He took in the tent in one sweep. Dead screens, nervous techs, a colonel too stiff, and a young woman in the corner coaxing life out of a machine that looked older than most of the soldiers. "Colonel Madison," he barked, voice sharp enough to cut canvas. "Report." "Sir," Madison started, but his throat worked like gravel. "We've sustained what appears to be a coordinated electronic warfare event. Lost 2 patrols for check-in. Specialist Herein," he gestured awkwardly toward the corner. "Restored partial comms through legacy hardware. We have preliminary coordinates on Echo 2. Thorne's gaze followed the gesture. It landed on Anna. She didn't turn immediately. She finished a line of code, locked the HF to a steady hum, and only then swiveled her chair, meeting the general's stare with the same even calm she'd given every private and captain since arriving. For a heartbeat, neither spoke, and then Thorne froze. It was visible even to the youngest techs. His face drained of its desert sunburn. His pupils pinched like he was staring at a photograph he hadn't expected to see. He took half a step forward, ignoring Madison, ignoring the aides scribbling frantic notes. "Sir?" one of them asked nervously. "You all right?" Thorne didn't answer. His lips moved once, barely audible, but the tent was so quiet everyone heard it. Kestrel. The word carried weight the way some metals do, invisible but undeniable. A legend murmured in classified briefings. A ghost story traded in dark corners of the Pentagon. A name that was not supposed to belong to anyone alive. Madison's jaw tightened. He remembered the black bars in Anna's file, the way they mocked him now. He felt as if the desert itself had lied to him. The Parallax contractor stared wide-eyed, like a man watching his company's stock price collapse. Anna gave no acknowledgement. No nod, no denial. She simply rose from her chair, back straight, bun severe, and handed Madison a notepad with cleanly written coordinates. "Rescue window," she said in that steady voice. 3 hours. If you miss it, Echo 2 is gone. Her words broke the spell. Thorne blinked, shoulders shifting under the weight of memory and command. The aides scribbled again. Madison took the notepad with both hands, as though it might burn him. The room's hierarchy had been shattered. Soldiers who had smirked when she poured coffee now looked at her with something close to reverence. Diaz, standing by the door, stared at her like a man seeing a constellation for the first time. Even Peters, still trembling, seemed steadied by the sight of her composure. Thorne finally found his voice. Low, rough. "You were listed as Kia." Anna's eyes didn't flicker. "Then let's keep it that way, sir." The general held her gaze another beat, then gave a slow nod, the kind of gesture reserved for equals, not subordinates. When he turned back to Madison, his voice was steel. "You heard her. Execute on those coordinates. And Colonel," he paused, letting the weight hang, "try not to underestimate your people again." The colonel swallowed. "Yes, sir." The JTOC erupted in movement. Maps, radios, runners, orders spilling like water from a burst dam. But through it all, Anna remained where she was, quiet and immovable, the ghost at the heart of the storm. The coordinates sat on the map like a wound. A box canyon on the north face, narrow throat, high ridges. Every officer in the JTOC could see it for what it was, a kill zone. Echo 2 had been herded in, pinned by a sniper overwatch and cut off by jamming. The standard playbook gave them hours, maybe less. Colonel Madison leaned over the grease pencil marks, his voice tight. Quick reaction force moves from the south. Access road to the canyon. Dismount 2 clicks out, sweep and clear uphill. It's slow, but it's doctrine. "Sir," Lieutenant Kovic blurted, desperate to sound useful. "They'll be dead before the QRF even sees the ridge. The road will be mined. It's bait." Madison's jaw clenched. He knew it too, but old habits die hard. He stared at the map as though it might rewrite itself. Then his gaze slid, unwilling but inevitable, to Anna. She stood beside the HF console, posture crisp, eyes scanning the contour lines with a focus that ignored rank. She hadn't spoken yet. She didn't need to. The silence itself demanded her turn. Specialist, Madison said finally. The word was no longer an insult. You see something we don't? Anna stepped closer to the table. She traced one finger lightly across the map, her voice low but steady. The southern road is the obvious play. The enemy expects it. That's why they cut comms, why they jammed the drones, to funnel you into doctrine. Her finger moved west, tapping a faint notation, a dotted line almost erased by time. Here, geological survey marker, ventilation shaft for an abandoned mining operation, marked as collapsed. But, she flicked her eyes toward the air guard captain. Thermal imaging from 3 years ago shows temperature differentials. That shaft isn't sealed. It breathes. The room hushed. Even the radios seemed to quiet themselves. Anna continued. A 4-man element. Light kit no more. Enter here, move subterranean. The shaft exits 300 meters behind the overwatch position. Neutralize the sniper. Signal Echo 2 to move. Meanwhile, she tapped the southern road. Send the QRF loud. Let the enemy watch them blunder into the canyon mouth. By the time they commit to the bait, the overwatch is gone, Echo 2 is moving, and your distraction force is firing blanks at ghosts. Kovic stared. Ma'am, that's insane. It's war, Sergeant Reyes growled from the edge of the table. His voice carried the weight of 3 deployments and scars no one asked about. And it'll work. Madison looked between them. His playbook whispered in one ear. The ghost in front of him spoke in the other. One path was safe, predictable, and fatal. The other was madness, but madness shaped by someone who had already seen the board 3 moves ahead. Finally, he nodded. Reyes, pick your 3 best. Pack light. You're going down a hole. Reyes didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. He glanced at Anna, and for the first time his eyes held something like fire again. We'll need comms that don't choke underground. I'll configure 2 handhelds for low-frequency repeater mode, Anna replied. Line of sight in the shaft. 1 burst transmission once you're clear. Keep it short. Reyes gave her a sharp nod. He didn't salute. Not yet. But the weight in his gaze was respect, not suspicion. Orders rippled out. The QRF began to load up, loud and visible by design. Reyes's chosen 3 hard-eyed, quiet men checked weapons and stripped down to bare essentials. The air inside the JTOC thickened with tension, but not the panicked kind. The kind before a storm breaks, when everyone knows the plan is insane and knows it's the only one that might work. Anna returned to the HF console, fingers quick, calm. Her world was signal strength and terrain echoes, not stripes on her sleeve. She handed Reyes the tuned radios herself. He took them carefully, as if they were relics, and met her eyes. See you topside, he said simply. The general watched it all in silence, his face unreadable. Only his eyes betrayed him, fixed on Anna with a mixture of awe and unease, as if every move she made confirmed a ghost story he'd once prayed was fiction. Outside, engines roared. The QRF rolled out toward the southern road, dust plumes rising into the darkening sky. Reyes and his 3 vanished into the mouth of a forgotten shaft, carrying radios tuned by a woman who was not supposed to exist. And in the JTOC, the coffee girl stood with one hand resting lightly on the old HF console, waiting for the night to prove her right, or bury them all. The desert night has a way of amplifying silence. At range echo, that silence pressed into every chest, heavy as the Kevlar stacked by the door. The TOC's dead digital screens reflected nothing but anxious faces. All ears strained toward the one living console, the dusty HF Anna had coaxed back into the fight. Reyes team, check, she said, voice steady. A beat of static. Then a calm reply, team moving, shaft stable. Proceeding forward. A ripple went through the tent. Shoulders eased, just slightly. Madison nodded once, as if reminding himself that this insane plan was now the only plan. Minutes dragged. Men watched the map like gamblers eyeing dice. The QRF rumbled south, loud and deliberate, headlights blazing across the flats, bait in steel skin. On the other net, Reyes's voice came clipped, efficient, 200 meters in, air thin but workable, calm holding. Anna tuned a knob a fraction, sharpening the signal until it cut clean. She stood as still as the HF rack itself, every motion efficient. Then, contact. A whisper of gunfire, muffled but unmistakable, bled through the speaker. The tent froze. Reyes's breathing came loud. Overwatch sighted. Engaging. 3 heartbeats. 4. Silence stretched like wire pulled too tight. Then, Overwatch down. Spotter neutralized. Shaft clear. Moving to exfil Echo 2. The tent erupted. Not in cheers, not yet, but in a sudden surge of voices, orders colliding, relief masked as urgency. Madison slammed a fist on the map board. QRF, hold position. Echo 2 is moving. Through the HF came faint, broken voices. Wounded men, strained but alive. Reyes again. Echo 2 extracted. For strong. 1 wounded. Moving through canyon floor. Cover intact. Anna didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She simply kept the line open, monitoring each burst until the canyon spat the men back out into the night. 20 minutes later, the first dust-covered figures stumbled through the JTOC flap. Echo 2 looked half dead, eyes red, uniforms torn, but upright. Their sergeant, bandaged arm pressed to his chest, locked eyes on Anna before anyone else. Without hesitation, he stopped, drew himself to his full height, and snapped a salute. "Ma'am," he said, voice hoarse but clear, "we owe you our lives." The room hushed. The other 3 survivors followed, one by one, battered hands rising to crisp salutes aimed not at Madison, not at Thorne, but at the woman still standing by the HF console. For a moment, the chain of command bent under the weight of something older and stronger than rank. Earned respect. Sergeant Reyes entered last, grime streaking his face, eyes alight with something long buried. He stopped before Anna, boots planted, and raised his salute sharp enough to cut glass. "Thank you," he said simply. The tent seemed to hold its breath. Madison stepped forward, the map forgotten. His pride, his earlier contempt, all stripped bare. He didn't salute. Instead, he offered his hand. "Specialist Varen," he said, voice rough but steady. "Effective immediately, you're assigned to this command team. Senior Tactical Advisor." Anna looked at the hand for a long second, then took it. Her grip was firm, unyielding, neither humble nor triumphant. A contract of mutual respect, nothing more, nothing less. Behind them, soldiers who had smirked at the coffee girl now looked at her with awe. Diaz, wide-eyed near the doorway, whispered something reverent that no one corrected. General Thorne hadn't moved. He watched it all with the expression of a man staring at a ghost he once buried. When the noise settled, he crossed the tent, slow and deliberate. He didn't salute either. Instead, he gave her a single, heavy nod. "Good to know you're still on the wall," he said quietly. Anna inclined her head, expression unreadable. Her eyes, however, betrayed the faintest flicker of something. Weariness, perhaps, or resignation. Ghosts don't stay buried forever. That night, when Range Echo finally slept, Anna didn't. She walked the perimeter in silence, a ceramic mug in one hand, a borrowed rifle in the other. Soldiers passed her and gave respectful nods. She returned each one with the same calm gravity. The coffee girl was gone. In her place stood a sentinel, quiet and unshakable, and everyone at Range Echo knew it. Dawn crept over the Mojave like a curtain slowly pulled back, revealing jagged ridges in strokes of gold. The night's chaos felt distant, as if it had happened in another world. But Range Echo was different now. Every tent, every Humvee, every soldier carried the weight of what they had seen, the weight of a ghost stepping into the light. Anna stood at the western perimeter, steam curling from the ceramic mug in her hand. The rifle slung across her shoulder wasn't standard issue. It was the tuned marksman weapon a young private had pressed into her palms the night before. He hadn't called it a gift, hadn't asked permission. He had simply said, "Ma'am, figured you'd need something with more reach." She hadn't refused. The weapon fit her hands with the kind of familiarity you don't argue with. Inside the camp, the usual shuffle of morning began. Generators coughed. Boots crunched over gravel. Voices carried thin in the cold air. But there was a subtle shift. Where soldiers might once have cut across her path without noticing, now they veered wide, offering nods sharp with respect. No words, no questions, just acknowledgement. She sipped her coffee and returned each nod in kind. Behind her, the JTOC buzzed with new urgency. Screens were still unreliable, but the officers were sharper, their chatter tinged with humility. Madison's voice carried calmer, steadier. He had been forced to swallow pride, and in doing so had discovered something harder and better: trust. General Thorne emerged from the command tent just after sunrise. His aides trailed behind, scribbling notes, eyes darting between him and Anna. He dismissed them with a curt gesture and walked alone to the perimeter. His boots crunched over gravel until he stopped a few feet from her. For a long moment he said nothing. He simply watched the horizon, where the sun climbed higher, cutting long shadows across the desert floor. Finally, his voice came low, roughened by something more than age. "They listed you as Kia after the Argent's incident." Anna didn't look at him. "That was the arrangement. Bury the ghost. Let the world move on." "I signed the paper," Thorne admitted, his jaw tight. "Closed service. Empty headstone. And I told myself it was better that way. Cleaner." "You were right," she said simply. She set the mug down on the barrier wall and adjusted the rifle strap. The ghost was supposed to stay in the ground. Thorne turned to her then, eyes sharp, almost pleading. "But you didn't. You saved them. You saved all of us." Anna finally met his gaze. Her expression was calm, but in her eyes flickered something deeper, weariness carved into steel. "I saved them because I was here. Don't mistake coincidence for resurrection, General." He studied her, the way a man studies a storm cloud, half in awe, half in fear. Then, slowly, he gave a deliberate nod. No salute, no orders, just acknowledgement between equals who knew too much about shadows. "Good to know you're still watching over them," he said. "Good to know you're still on the wall." Anna inclined her head. "Walls crack, sir. Don't lean too hard." He allowed himself the faintest smile at that. Then he left her to the horizon, his aides scrambling to catch up. As the camp came fully alive, soldiers moved with a different rhythm. They weren't just following doctrine anymore, they were following an example. Diaz passed by, offering her a grin that was equal parts pride and awe. Peters, the young comms tech who had whispered Kestrel like a prayer, nodded once, eyes wide with respect. Anna lifted her mug again. The coffee was hot, bitter, exactly as she liked it. For the first time since stepping off the transport days ago, she allowed herself the smallest breath of satisfaction. Not joy, not triumph, just the quiet dignity of being seen for what she was, and not what others assumed. The coffee girl was gone, erased from the camp's memory as if she had never existed. In her place stood something far more unsettling and far more reassuring. A sentinel. A ghost who walked in daylight. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the night chill. Anna Varen stood her post, rifle in one hand, mug in the other, a silent figure carved against the vast desert sky. And though no one dared to say it out loud, every soldier at range echo knew. They had not been saved by luck or doctrine or command. They had been saved by a legend. By Kestrel, the ghost operative they had mocked, dismissed, and ordered to pour their coffee. Now, they would never forget her. They had mocked her as the coffee girl. They had rolled their eyes when she filled their mugs, dismissed her as background noise in a room of louder voices. But in the hour when every system collapsed, when the desert swallowed signals and men's courage faltered, it was the quiet one in the corner who held the line. Anna Varen, Kestrel, reminded them of a truth the military too often forgets. Rank is authority, but competence is power. She did not need medals or speeches or applause. Her respect was earned in silence, in the hum of an old radio, in the precise cut of decisions that saved lives. She didn't fight for recognition. She fought because when men were lost in the dark, someone had to be the light. The soldiers of Range Echo would never look at her the same again. They would never forget that the woman they mocked became the sentinel who saved them. And we shouldn't forget it either, because sometimes the heroes who shape history don't arrive with brass bands or headline names. Sometimes they come disguised as clerks, mechanics, medics, or a specialist sent to make the coffee. And when the moment comes, they reveal what they were all along: warriors hidden in plain sight. So the next time you're tempted to judge someone by their assignment, their appearance, or the way they seem to fade into the background, remember the ghost at Range Echo. Respect isn't given. It's earned, in the shadows, by those who choose duty over ego. If the story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who underestimates quiet strength. And subscribe for more tales of hidden heroes, of courage that blooms where no one expects it. Because legends aren't born in the spotlight, they rise when the lights go out.